there, Araminta from the Cwicly team. In this video, we will be exploring and building together a previous next block context with Cwicly in Gutenberg. But first, what is a previous next block context and how does it work in Cwicly? Simply put, it is a feature that allows you to build from scratch a previous or next blog post that the user can then click on to be redirected to the desired post. It's basically a way to keep the user engaged in an effort to propose blog posts that could potentially spark their interest. The benefit is that you get to design to your exact needs how it looks with as much or as little information, with excerpts, author name, comments, category, featured image, and so on, instead of simply a previous before post link, which would greatly limit your designing power and control. But naturally, the link option is available for you to use if that is your preferred method. In Cwicly, it simply works by applying the previous before block specific context to a div and using the dynamic values as you normally would. Now, let's get building. Here we are in the Gutenberg editor. You might recognize this template that we built in our last video for our single post template, to which we will be adding a previous and next block context, since it is appropriate. I have already added a section and an H2 heading. Our previous and before blog posts structure is the following: a columns block containing 2 linked columns, containing a parent div to which we will add the dynamic context, nesting an H3 heading, our post's featured image div, a taxonomy term paragraph for our blog's category, an H3 heading for our post's title, our post's excerpt, and lastly, a div containing the author's image and name. This will be fairly quick and simple to build, since once we build the first column, we simply need to copy column link it to the second column and fill in the information. That's it. Let's get started by adding a columns block. We can select the second variation to quicken the process. Let's set a 40 pixel row and column gap to create more distance between our columns. Selecting the first column, we can set a white background color and set flex start, which means items are packed towards the start of the flex direction, and set center. I prefer a slightly rounded look that will better match the rest of our design, so let's head to the Advanced tab, into the Borders panel and set a 5 pixel border radius. Let's also set up a hover effect, since users will be hovering on these columns a fair bit. First, let's set a transition duration to 0.5 seconds in the Effects panel to make it smooth. Switching to hover mode, in the Borders panel, we can set a 40 pixel blur and set X to 20 pixels and Y to 10 pixels, and add a light grey shadow. We can now add a div that will contain all our other elements for our previous before block context. Let's set a column direction, where our elements will then be on top of each other, as opposed to the row direction, where our elements would be placed next to each other. We can also set flex start, so that our items are packed to the left of our div's flex direction. Let's also rename this div in the Navigator panel with a familiar name such as Prev div, so that we can recognize it better in the future. In the Sizing panel, we can set 100% width, so that it takes the whole space available. Now we can set this div's dynamic context in said panel. It can be simply done by selecting the context drop-down and choosing either previous or next. In our case, we will naturally be starting with the previous post. Once we've built our design, we will get into further detail about the same taxonomy term toggle and the exclude parameter to better illustrate it rather than do it blindly. Let's start by adding our blocks. Let's add a 25 pixel H2 heading that we will not set dynamically, since we are using it for design accessibility reasons, so that the user clearly knows which post is previous and which is next. I will simply be typing previous article since it's generic and understandable. We can already add a spacing to this heading so that the next block we add won't be right below it. So let's head to the margin and padding panel and set a 20 pixel bottom margin, which creates space between block elements. Conversely, padding is used to create space around an element's content inside of any defined borders. Now let's add a div that will constitute our featured image. I am consciously choosing to add a div instead of an image block, since later on we will be adding relative styles, involving a zooming effect that isn't possible with an image block. So if you're not planning to add that type of relative style, feel free to add an image block instead. Let's rename this div to Featured Image in the Navigator panel. This div needs a size, so let's navigate to the sizing panel and set a 445 pixel height and 100% width. Now we can set our image dynamically, since we wanted to show the featured image of this current page previous post. Heading to the background panel, we can set the image type, set the source to dynamic, and data to WordPress, and select Featured Image. Let's set the cover property, which tells the browser to ensure the image's complete covering of its container. We can also set left and top to 50%. This image div's corners should be rounded to better match the corners of the column we rounded. We can do so in the Borders panel by setting a 5 pixel border radius. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 25 pixel bottom margin to create a breathing space between the bottom of this div and the block we will be adding now. We can add a taxonomy term block for our post category. In the Taxonomy Terms panel, we can set the source to current. We can set its display to flex instead of grid, since for its use it is more appropriate. Then we can set a row direction and center it. Let's add a paragraph block that will have our post category name. In an effort to save time, instead of styling this paragraph, we can simply add the paragraph below with the styling we want's class name in its additional classes. Now we can set the paragraph dynamically so that it displays our post category. We can open the dynamic settings and set the source to taxonomy terms and set the data to name. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 15 pixel bottom margin. Now let's add a 30 pixel H3 heading that will constitute our post's title. Let's set it up dynamically to display our post's title. We can set the source to WordPress and select Post Title. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 10 pixel bottom margin. Let's not forget to set a link so that users can be redirected to the post's page. Remember to toggle active, leave the type to URL but set the source to dynamic, and then select Post URL. We can now add an 18 pixel font size paragraph that will constitute our post's excerpt. In the dynamic settings, we can set the source to WordPress and select Post Excerpt. I will also set a limited number of characters to 100 for it not to be too lengthy. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 20 pixel bottom margin. Lastly, we can add a div that will contain our author's image and name. We can set a row direction and center it. Let's first add a div that will constitute the author's image. In the Sizing panel, we can define a 30 pixel height and width. In the Border panel, we can set a 100% border radius. Now let's set this author's image dynamically. We can do so in the Background panel. Here, we can set an image type, set the source to dynamic, set WordPress as data, and select Author Picture. We can set the cover property and set left and top to 50% for it to be placed in the center. In the Margin and Padding panel, we can set a 10 pixel right margin. Selecting our div, we can now add a 15 pixel font-sized paragraph and capitalize it. Now let's set our author's name. Let's open the dynamic settings, set WordPress as source, and set author name. I will be adding by in the before field for a more personal touch. We have added every element to this div. However, it looks squeezed to the sides of the column. So selecting the column and heading to the Margin and Padding panel, let's set an equal 30 pixel padding. Before we copy column link to this column, we can quickly add relative styles to add some flair and make it more user interactive. Since I want the same effect I had used in my archive post layout, which is to say an image zooming effect and a blue heading both on hover, I can simply copy the relative styles. Let's select the div containing the relative styles I need and open the Relative Styles panel. First, I will copy the div image relative style by selecting the copy icon. Now I can head back to my column and head to the Relative Styles panel. Here, I can select the paste icon and paste it in. Et voilà! All I need to do now is replace the previous class name with the one of my image div I want to target. Before I do, I can quickly show you and tweak what I have styled for this relative style. This zooming effect is simply done by making the height larger on hover. For this image, since it is larger, I actually wanted to have 110% height. On hover, I will change it to 125%. So I will quickly select the image div and copy its class name. I can now replace it in the Relative Styles rule editor. And there, in a few seconds, I have a relative style all set up for me. I will quickly do the same for the heading. We are finally ready to copy link this column for our second column. The quickly linking feature allows you to have one main block that controls the style of other blocks. We can do this by opening the copy-paste menu and selecting Copy Column Linked. Then we can select our second column and select Replace Column. As you can see, the styles of my first column are linked to my new one. And if I tweak my first column's background color or border, our new column takes on the new style seamlessly. It's a great time saver feature. Before I start filling in the missing information, I can set the next block context on the div. Speaking of the div, we can rename it in the Navigator panel to make things easier. I will name it Next Div. That done, I can quickly fill in the different blocks. Now let's ensure our design's responsiveness. Switching to tablet view, our columns look squeezed. So let's open the grid layout editor and bring our number of fractions down to 1 and delete the second module. On mobile view, our image block is slightly too large. In the sizing panel, we can set a 245 pixel height. Selecting our H3 post title heading, we can set a 22 pixel font size for a more appropriate look. We can also bring down our columns padding to 20 pixels. As you can see, building and setting up this feature is effortless. Let's now discover in more detail the taxonomy filtering we can bring to this previous next block context. So let's select our Prev div and head to the dynamic context panel. Quickly, before we do that, I do want to show how the previous and next context block works. So I will exit this page and head to my posts. The post we have been editing is the Web Page Awards, the best, worst and weirdest. The one prior to it is What Will Designing Be in 100 Years, which is exactly what we have as our previous article on our post. And the next post is, of course, 15 best Twitter accounts to learn about design. What I'm trying to explain is, the previous before block context works according to the post you're currently on. So if I had built it on the All Codes Lead to Rome page, my previous post would be the ultimate cheat sheet on blogs. And my next one would be What Will Design Be Like in 100 Years? Now let's actually discover the taxonomy filtering possibilities. If I toggle the same taxonomy term, my current previous post will disappear and be replaced, since the current post I'm on is in the uncategorized category, whereas the post that just disappeared was in the design category. So this feature will skip posts that don't fit in the same category as the current post until it finds the one that does. So if the post I'm editing on currently were in the design category, that post would have remained. By default, the taxonomy filter is set to category, but you can set it to tags and navigation menus. We can go even further by excluding certain categories. The post All Codes Lead to Rome is both in uncategorized and design, so if I exclude the design category, it passes on to the next post. On our next post div, we can see that we can of course exclude certain posts without the same taxonomy term toggled. You can choose to exclude however many categories you want. And there you have it. We have finished building and setting up this feature. The great thing is with Cwicly, you have the option to either simply use the previous next blog post link, or to build your own previous next blog post layout with whatever elements you want. The flexibility and control is in your hands, as it should be. Thank you for watching. I hope this tutorial was helpful in better understanding how to build a previous next blog context from scratch in Gutenberg with Cwicly. If you have any questions or doubts, please don't hesitate to let us know down below. See you next time. Bye!